What if everything you thought you knew about one of the most influential moguls in entertainment was a lie? What if the man behind the empire, the face of success, the king of hip-hop, and the beacon of power was hiding something far darker beneath the surface? Get ready for the reckoning, because the truth about Diddy is about to shatter everything. Their relationship had the world captivated. Diddy and JLO were the epitome of glamour, the epitome of success. To many, they were a perfect couple, a harmonious mix of celebrity, wealth, and allure. But behind the scenes, the cracks began to show. Jennifer Lopez, ever the embodiment of strength and independence, found herself drawn into Diddy's world, a world that wasn't as welcoming as it seemed. What seemed to be moments of affection and romantic gestures quickly morphed into a pattern of manipulation. Diddy was a master at weaving a web of emotional dependency, drawing people in with grand gestures and promises of love, only to pull them back with harsh demands for loyalty and control. Behind the glitz and glam, Jennifer struggled with the pressure of being in his orbit. Diddy was notorious for his need to dominate every aspect of the people in his life. His constant surveillance, constant questioning, and need for validation from those closest to him made it impossible to maintain the facade of a happy couple. The public saw the red carpet moments, the lavish holidays, and the coordinated photo shoots, but Jennifer's personal experience was vastly different. She spoke of the emotional toll, the constant feeling of being watched, and the undercurrent of tension that slowly wore her down. She, like many others, was caught in a cycle of emotional highs and lows, where love was never unconditional. It was always linked to performance, success, and submission. As the reckoning continued to unveil the darker parts of Diddy's relationships, Cassie Ventura's story became another critical turning point. To the public, she had been Diddy's muse, a young, beautiful woman who had seemingly been swept off her feet by a man who had once been the king of hip-hop and entertainment. They were the picture-perfect couple, sharing photos of their love and supporting each other through public events. Cassie, an up-and-coming artist, looked to Diddy as both a mentor and a lover. What the world didn't see, however, was the growing emotional and psychological burden Cassie was carrying. The relationship, built on a foundation of supposed love and mutual support, was in fact rooted in manipulation and control. Diddy's affection was a tool he used to keep Cassie close, to maintain a grip on her both personally and professionally. The relationship took a darker turn in 2023 when Cassie filed a lawsuit against Diddy, alleging years of abuse, both physical and emotional. The accusations were stunning, not just because of the public figures involved, but because they revealed the true extent of Diddy's power over the women in his life. Cassie described a cycle of manipulation, fear, and intimidation that had been disguised as love. Diddy was not only emotionally abusive, but physically violent, and he used his power and influence to keep her silent for years. What Cassie experienced behind closed doors was a far cry from the couple that appeared on magazine covers or social media. The media reaction was intense, and the public was left grappling with the revelation that the man they had once idolized, who had built his empire on the backs of iconic music and influential brands, was capable of such monstrous acts. Diddy, known for his ruthless business acumen and fearsome public persona, was suddenly revealed as someone who had used his wealth, influence, and power to intimidate, control, and break the people closest to him. The documentary series did not shy away from showing the moments that would ultimately define Diddy's downfall. The tapes, initially meant to portray his success, became a haunting record of a man losing control. They showed Diddy behind closed doors, far from the charismatic mogul the world knew, struggling with the reality of his crumbling empire. In these private moments, his paranoia became palpable. Diddy's ability to manipulate the public image to keep people loyal to him was slowly unraveling. There was a turning point in the series when the private footage revealed the emotional and psychological toll Diddy's life had taken on him. No longer just a star, Diddy was a man battling his own demons, trying to maintain an image of invincibility even as the legal battles mounted and his relationships disintegrated. The footage painted a picture of a man who, despite his best efforts, could no longer keep up the facade of control. Each piece of new footage revealed a deeper sense of isolation, a sense of abandonment that Diddy had once used to instill fear in others, but now found himself facing. The tapes revealed not just the emotional cost of his power, but also his attempt to manipulate his own narrative. They captured him coaching those around him, advising them on what to say, how to present their stories, and how to protect him. It was a disturbing look into the lengths Diddy was willing to go to maintain his grip on power, even if it meant bending the truth or worse, manipulating reality itself. As the reckoning continued, the spotlight on Diddy's life and actions began to shine brighter than ever before. The emotional highs and lows, the manipulation, and the destructive behaviors that had once been hidden were now exposed for all to see. The world was left to grapple with the duality of a man who had once been an icon, only to be revealed as a figure capable of darkness beyond what anyone had imagined. The story of Diddy's downfall was no longer just about one man's rise to fame. It was about the systems of control that had allowed him to maintain power, the emotional destruction that had been left in his wake, and the lives he had manipulated along the way. The reckoning was more than just a documentary. It was a reckoning for a culture that had allowed this kind of behavior to go unchecked for far too long. As the world watched, the story of Diddy's empire crumbled and the truth came to light. irrevocably changing how the world would view him, his empire, and the people who had once been loyal to him. Cassie Ventura's story became a critical chapter in the saga of Diddy's empire. On the surface, Cassie had all the hallmarks of a typical Hollywood love story: youth, beauty, and a promising career, all woven together with the support and backing of one of the biggest names in the entertainment world. But underneath the glamorous facade lay an insidious pattern of manipulation that would only be revealed years later. Cassie had been Diddy's muse, his starlet, the one who seemed to embody the very essence of his success. They appeared to have the ideal relationship, with their constant displays of affection and public declarations of love. But the truth behind closed doors was a stark contrast to the public image they had cultivated. As Cassie slowly built her own career as an artist and actress, Diddy's influence over her became all-encompassing. What was once seen as a loving relationship soon turned into an emotional prison. Cassie spoke in her lawsuit about a pattern of manipulation that had been disguised as love. Diddy's affection for her was conditional, always attached to his need for control. He had a way of making her feel adored, only to turn cold and distant when she sought independence or dared to challenge his authority. His affection ebbed and flowed in a way that kept Cassie on edge, constantly unsure of where she stood in his life. The lavish gifts and romantic gestures were always overshadowed by the emotional toll of trying to meet Diddy's expectations. When Cassie finally took the brave step of filing her lawsuit, it was more than just a personal reckoning. It was a public revelation of the sinister nature of Diddy's control. The legal papers exposed years of emotional abuse, manipulation, and coercion, but it was the release of the surveillance footage that truly shook the world. The footage, which showed Diddy physically assaulting Cassie in a hotel hallway, was a horrifying moment that stripped away the carefully constructed image of the man who had once been untouchable. The shocking video was broadcast to millions, leaving no room for doubt about the extent of Diddy's abuse. The world was forced to confront the fact that the man who had once built his empire on charisma, business acumen, and his ability to charm the world had been living a double life. Diddy's power and influence had allowed him to remain above reproach for years, but the truth could no longer be denied. The footage raised a haunting question: how had the public been so blind to the darkness beneath Diddy's surface? How had his fame and wealth shielded him for so long? The answer was simple yet chilling. Diddy's empire was built on more than just music and business, it was built on control. As The Reckoning Season 2 continued to unfold, the depth of Diddy's manipulative behavior became even clearer. His relationships with other women, such as Lori Harvey and Young Miami, were not just superficial flings or romantic entanglements. They were another chapter in his obsessive need to dominate and control the people in his life. Each new relationship served as a fresh reminder that for Diddy, love and affection were never genuine. Rather, they were tools he used to maintain power and influence. The emotional highs and lows of his relationships were always calculated, always deliberate. What was especially troubling was the way Diddy would withdraw from these women after they had become emotionally invested. He would lavish them with gifts, attention, and promises of love, only to pull away when they showed signs of independence or questioned his authority. The emotional roller coaster would leave them feeling uncertain, unsure of where they stood in his life, and questioning whether they were truly loved or merely pawns in his game of power. This pattern, which had been so deeply ingrained in Diddy's relationships, had left a trail of emotional destruction in its wake. The documentary's portrayal of Diddy's relationships served as a stark contrast to the image he had cultivated for decades. No longer was he the charming, unstoppable mogul. He was revealed as someone who used love and affection as a means of control. His relationships, once seen as the epitome of success, were now revealed as tragic, manipulative entanglements that had left countless women broken and disillusioned. In the wake of Cassie's lawsuit and the subsequent revelations, Diddy's empire began to unravel. The public's perception of him, once untouchable, began to shift. As the layers of his carefully constructed persona were peeled away, it became clear that the man who had built his brand on charm, charisma, and the art of seduction was, in fact, a master manipulator. His empire was not just a product of his business acumen, but of his ability to control, deceive, and manipulate those closest to him. The Reckoning, through its relentless pursuit of the truth, had brought to light the dark side of a man who had once been seen as an icon. It was not just a story of a celebrity's downfall. It was a broader reflection of a system that had allowed Diddy to operate with impunity for so long. His influence, his power, and his wealth had given him the tools to avoid scrutiny and to hide the true nature of his behavior. But with the release of The Reckoning Season 2, the world could no longer ignore the truth. Diddy's empire was crumbling and the reckoning had come. As The Reckoning Season 2 delved deeper into the life and relationships of Diddy, it became clear that the documentary was more than just a portrayal of a mogul's rise and fall. It was a chilling exposé of the emotional abuse and manipulation that had plagued his personal and professional life for decades. The documentary didn't accuse every woman Diddy had been involved with of being a victim, but it painted a disturbing and consistent picture of how power dynamics shaped every relationship. Diddy wasn't merely a man who loved. He was a man who consumed those around him, using his charm and charisma as a weapon to control and manipulate. The relationships Diddy had with women were framed not as mutually loving partnerships, but as calculated power plays. His emotional pendulum swung wildly. One minute, he was the charming, larger-than-life figure who could light up a room, and the next, he was a cold, controlling force demanding loyalty and submission. As the documentary revealed the darker aspects of his relationships, it became clear that what appeared to be love was, in fact, a form of emotional manipulation. Diddy used his affection to control those around him, creating a constant cycle of highs and lows that kept them emotionally invested and ultimately under his thumb. The more the documentary unfolded, the more it became apparent that Diddy's love was never truly love. It was a tool, a weapon that allowed him to dominate and manipulate those closest to him. Those who had been in his orbit, whether business partners, lovers, or friends, found themselves caught in a web of emotional chaos, never knowing when the next sudden shift would come. It was this volatility that gave Diddy the power he craved, as he always maintained control, pulling strings behind the scenes while crafting a public image of an unstoppable mogul. His empire, seemingly built on talent, hard work, and charisma, was in fact constructed on a foundation of manipulation, emotional turmoil, and an unrelenting need for dominance. But the most revealing aspect of The Reckoning Season 2 came not from interviews or testimony, but from a hidden treasure trove of 140 hours of private footage that Diddy had recorded himself over the years. These tapes, originally meant for a potential documentary chronicling his rise to fame, revealed a far more complicated and troubling reality. Diddy had always sought to control the narrative of his life, to present himself as the mastermind behind the empire. But the footage exposed the cracks in his carefully crafted persona. Captured in these intimate moments, Diddy was seen pacing back and forth, desperately trying to maintain control over a situation that was slipping from his grasp. These tapes were not the polished accounts of a mogul in control. They were raw, unfiltered glimpses of a man unraveling under the pressure of his own making. In these moments of vulnerability, Diddy appeared more like a man trapped by the very empire he had built, trying to manage his crumbling image, legal battles, and ever-growing list of enemies. The tapes became one of the most tantalizing elements of The Reckoning, with 50 Cent, the executive producer, teasing their existence in interviews. He hinted that the footage would change everything, revealing a side of Diddy the world had never seen. What had been shown to the public so far was only a small fraction of the raw material, leaving viewers to wonder just what else was hidden in those 140 hours of footage. Fans and critics alike eagerly awaited the next installment, anxious to uncover more of the truth behind the man they thought they knew. The anticipation reached a fever pitch as more of the tapes were slowly unveiled, and what they revealed was nothing short of explosive. Diddy's life, captured in real time, showed him grappling with his legal troubles, working tirelessly to salvage his public image and attempting to retain control over his empire. But it wasn't just his personal struggles that were exposed. There were whispers of something far more sinister. In these tapes, there were disturbing signs of witness tampering, with Diddy seen coaching people on what to say and how to protect his interests. His legal team, too, appeared to be part of the plan, working behind the scenes to manipulate the legal system and influence the outcome of his cases. As the footage continued to be released, the question became more pressing. What else was hiding in those tapes? If the full extent of their contents were ever revealed, it could be the final blow to Diddy's empire, potentially ending his career and exposing the darker side of the entertainment industry that had allowed him to operate with such impunity for so long. With each new revelation, the stakes grew higher, and it seemed inevitable that the truth would eventually catch up with him. The tapes, once intended as a testament to his success, had become a damning record of his downfall, a documentary that would change everything. The release of these tapes marked a pivotal moment in the documentary series, as they offered an unvarnished look at Diddy's life, free from the filters of fame and public relations. They exposed a man trying to keep his empire intact, even as the walls closed in around him. But the tapes also captured something darker, evidence of a man willing to go to any lengths to protect his power, even if it meant destroying those who had once been closest to him. In this moment, Diddy's carefully constructed empire appeared to be collapsing, and the world was left to witness the unraveling of one of the most powerful figures in entertainment history. The footage revealed in The Reckoning Season 2 wasn't merely a collection of private moments. It was a detonating device that exposed the internal machinations of Diddy's empire and raised questions about the very foundations of his success. These tapes didn't just show a mogul attempting to navigate personal turmoil. They painted a picture of a man desperately trying to save himself from the consequences of his own actions, all while orchestrating the events around him with chilling precision. His paranoia was palpable, caught on camera pacing and muttering in the shadows. Diddy seemed more concerned with maintaining control than with any semblance of personal peace. He was frantically trying to steer his empire through the storm, but his grip on reality was clearly slipping. According to insiders, the footage wasn't just full of strategic decisions and self-preservation efforts. It contained potentially incriminating conversations, moments that could turn the tide in ongoing investigations. Whispers circulated that these tapes could expose not just Diddy, but a number of influential figures in his life, including his closest associates, lawyers, and business partners. What was once seen as a glimpse into the private life of a celebrity was now emerging as hard evidence, perhaps capable of shifting the legal balance in ways nobody anticipated. The document. Ari's airings were just the beginning. The reckoning had only scratched the surface, with insiders claiming that the full scope of Diddy's tapes could be far more explosive than anyone realized. Some tapes were said to be too sensitive for public consumption, with evidence that could not only fuel public outrage but also spark lawsuits and provide fresh ammunition for Diddy's already mounting legal troubles. The recordings were no longer just a window into Diddy's psyche. They had become vital pieces of evidence, each frame potentially more damaging than the last. What Diddy had thought were personal logs of his rise to power had now turned into a devastating record of his fall. The series had already painted Diddy as a figure who used his influence to control the narrative of his life, but the tapes revealed just how far that control extended. Every interaction, every strategic decision he made was now on public display, making clear that he had orchestrated not only his rise to fame but the world around him, an empire built on manipulation and a carefully constructed facade. Yet behind the polished exterior, there was a fragile man trying to hold everything together as the world threatened to tear it all apart. The once powerful mogul had become a prisoner of his own empire, struggling to keep the pieces from collapsing in real time. Then the legal battles took a sharp turn for the worse. What had been whispered rumors of past indiscretions and misconduct quickly evolved into full-scale investigations. Federal agents raided Diddy's properties in both Miami and Los Angeles, seizing critical evidence in connection to an escalating human trafficking investigation. The whispers about his business practices and personal life, the things people had speculated about for years, had now morphed into an undeniable federal case. What had seemed like a collection of unsubstantiated rumors was now supported by physical evidence and testimonies. As the case unfolded, new names emerged and the evidence gathered from Diddy's own homes became a key part of the growing case. Diddy, once seen as invincible, now found himself in a legal storm he could not weather. The charges were severe and numerous: racketeering, sex trafficking, and transporting people for prostitution. The mogul who had built an empire on charm, charisma, and power was now facing the very system he had once dominated. His empire, which had appeared untouchable for so long, was starting to crumble in real time as the legal machinery turned inexorably in his direction. The case, which had started with vague rumors, had now turned into a full-blown media frenzy, with every new revelation serving to intensify the public's curiosity and outrage. By September 2024, Diddy's world had completely unraveled. He was arrested in New York, facing a cascade of charges that seemed to be part of a much larger web of criminal activity. Federal investigators were piecing together a damning case, using evidence obtained from Diddy's properties as well as testimonies from his former associates. His once lavish lifestyle was now in stark contrast to the grave charges he was facing. What had once been a media darling was now a symbol of the fall from grace, and his empire's collapse seemed imminent. At the same time, the reckoning cameras kept rolling, capturing what would become the final moments of Diddy's freedom. Much of the footage featured in Season 2 was taken directly from Diddy's own recordings, those 140 hours of raw, unedited footage that he had thought would safeguard his legacy. What he had hoped would serve as a testament to his genius and empire building had instead become a chilling documentation of his downfall. The tapes, once a symbol of his rise, had now become the undeniable evidence of his fall from grace. And the more that came to light, the clearer it became that Diddy's carefully constructed empire had been built on far darker foundations than anyone had imagined. The public's perception of Diddy, once a powerful mogul and a symbol of success, had been shattered. His relationships, his empire, and his public persona were all part of a larger narrative of manipulation and control. As the reckoning continued to air, it became a damning reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the lengths to which some will go to maintain control. The question remained: how much longer could Diddy's empire and his life as he knew it survive the consequences of his actions? The tapes, now viewed by millions, had given the public an intimate, unfiltered look into the chaos of his world, and the world was left to watch as it all came crashing down. As The Reckoning Season 2 approached its finale, Diddy's legal team launched a desperate attempt to control the narrative, trying to prevent the fallout from further damaging the mogul's public image. They sent cease and desist letters to Netflix, accusing the streaming giant of exploiting stolen footage for profit. The message was clear: Diddy's team wanted to stop the documentary from airing any more footage that could potentially destroy what was left of his reputation. But Netflix, emboldened by the overwhelming evidence and the public demand for transparency, stood firm. In a rare and direct response, the platform issued a blunt statement: the footage was legally obtained and no one had been paid to participate. This isn't retribution, it's documentation. This statement was more than just a defense of their editorial choices. It was a declaration of independence in the face of one of entertainment's most powerful figures. It was Netflix's way of telling the world that the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, would not be silenced. By standing their ground, they made it clear that this wasn't an act of revenge or exploitation, but an effort to show what had been hidden for so long. The footage that had once been thought of as private, personal, and untouchable had now become a vital part of a larger, unavoidable truth. For Diddy, this was the moment his carefully constructed image began to crumble completely. The very thing he had spent decades building, the empire of fame, luxury, and power, was now exposed for what it truly was. The public had already seen glimpses of the chaos, control, and manipulation that lay beneath the surface. But now, with the full extent of the footage aired for the world to witness, the facade was completely shattered. There was no more room for spin or denial. The truth was out there, and it was undeniable. The fact that Netflix stood by its decision to air the footage sent a powerful message. The power of influence, once so capable of bending the world to its will, could no longer shield the truth. Diddy's once unshakable hold on the narrative was gone. No amount of legal threats or media spin could undo what had been revealed. His empire, built on the backs of countless people, many of whom were now willing to speak out, was crumbling in real time. As the season came to a close, it was clear that Diddy's fate was no longer in his hands. The documentary had done what no legal team or publicist could. It had shattered the illusion of invincibility that had surrounded him for years. The damage was done, and there was no escaping the fallout. For all his power, all his wealth, and all his influence, the truth had proven to be far more potent than anything he had ever built. And as the Reckoning season finale left viewers with a haunting glimpse of a man unraveling before their eyes, the question remained: would Diddy ever be able to reclaim the power he once held, or had his empire finally irreparably fallen? So, what happens when the walls close in? When the most powerful figures in entertainment come crashing down, you've seen the footage, you've heard the allegations, but there's more. Don't miss the rest of The Reckoning, because the truth doesn't stop here. Subscribe now, hit that notification bell, and be the first to know when the final chapters are revealed. The world deserves the truth, and so do you.